We really don't have anything
Scripted.
We just go with it, whatever feels right.
Usually it's like fly by the seat of our pants moment.
Those are my favorite kinds of podcasts. So we're so good.
Yeah, we recently started like diving into like you had a podcast, but you just recently, I think the episode we listened to was like said it was the last episode.
So that episode would have been from December of 2023. And the guest was actually my best friend who started out being my shadow work coach.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we transitioned out of a coaching relationship, I was like, there's something. Yeah. We just we love each other, and there was clearly more there. So yeah.
The conversation between the two of you was amazing.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, let's get you introduced, because we've been telling everybody, we're like, we have an amazing guest coming, and like the list of everything that you do is
I was going through the line and I was like, I don't even know what this means. I'm like on Google, what is?
Yeah, you've like, I feel like you've touched it all. So Kelly, please introduce yourself.
Where do I start?
That's how we felt. That's how you're doing it.
Yeah. What is your elevator like pitch? Like, what do you even like? Just, I don't want to categorize you into anything. You do a lot of stuff.
I would say that I'm very clear that my purpose in the world is to love. Full stop.
Yeah.
I do that in a bunch of different ways. I do that with my partner, now my fiance. I do that with my friends. I do that with my clients, whether they are trauma-informed leadership coaching clients, or they're sacred trauma healing clients, or Reiki clients, or cuddle therapy clients. Like, there's lots of ways to love in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then also I think just like the self-work and really practicing compassion and using this giant heart that I have to like really intentionally put that out there for other people, for their healing. That's kind of where the compassionate piece comes in, even if those are people who have harmed me. That feels like the best use of my time. So I would say that's how I'm going to say who I am today.
Wow.
My pronouns are they, them. I identify as gender fluid, but those feel almost secondary to, like
who you are. Yeah.
Who I am. Yeah.
Totally. I feel that. I vibe with that. My pronouns are they, them too. And I'm in this space where I just feel, however somebody takes me, I feel really comfortable, but I'm getting more confident in just saying exactly who I am to feel the best way.
Yeah. And it wasn't always the case, right? Like, this show is called Fashionably Late. So it wasn't always the case. I mean, I came out as gay, or actually I think I identified as a lesbian at the time when I was 19. Okay. And I don't identify like that anymore. And my pronouns were she, her for 40 years.
So in the LGBTQ plus community, how would you identify yourself? Just queer?
Queer. Yeah. Or queer or pansexual. But I think queer feels like a little bit more of an umbrella. And I feel like, there's so many labels, which is great and fine, that everyone gets to kind of identify in the way that they feel that day. But queer just feels like right.
Yeah. I feel like I find myself like interchanging just a little bit between lesbian and queer. Queer feels like I can encompass a lot of feelings that I have, but I feel like as in our relationship, just identifying lesbian feels right for us. But I don't think there's any like right or wrong answer when it comes to it, really.
No, not at all.
So cuddle therapy, I want to know about this because I've actually heard people recently speaking about it. So it's definitely a thing, but I love to cuddle. You're great at cuddling.
But how do you go from being someone who loves to cuddle to like, no, I'm going to cuddle people professionally?
Yeah. So I will say that everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, most people know how to cuddle. Like, it's kind of just part of our human existence to be able to like feel connection and be close to other people. That's not the case for everyone.
Mm.
And there are a lot of people for whom connection is really difficult. And that could be because of a physical or sexual abuse or violence experience that they've had. And they aren't trusting of people outside of a professional container. So that is just kind of one way you can think about it. But really, cuddle therapy is less about the cuddling than anything else. It's more about practicing consent, asking for what you want, make like knowing that it's okay to ask for what you want, and then holding yourself when someone has a boundary or when you enact a boundary and someone else has to receive that, right? So that could look like in a session, someone might be having an emotional release and they might need to change cuddle positions because they're kind of uncomfortable. They feel really vulnerable. It's like, okay, what would feel better for you in terms of position? Is that, do you want a menu or do you know, what might feel better? Once we get into the position, I might say, or they might say, hey, can I put my hand on your stomach? And I might say, that's actually a boundary for me. Now, that person, if they have a core wound of rejection, might hear that as like, oh, I'm being rejected. This person who I'm like now very physically, not sexually, but physically intimate with, has kind of said no to me. And they have to encounter something through that. So it's a really interesting process. And then I would say most of the sessions are essentially people having really big emotional releases and me just holding them because they didn't get that when they were younger, or they don't feel safe to do that in a non-professional setting. So it's boundary setting and consent training. That's what it is.
Hearing that makes me think there's probably so many people that could benefit from that and don't even know it.
Yeah. Yeah, because in our society, we're kind of intimacy allergic when it comes to our non-romantic or sexual partners.
Do you think that's just like Americans in general? Because I feel like other cultures, when I see other cultures engaging and interacting with each other, they're way more open to receive love and affection. And
Some.
like, I feel like here it's very rigid.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like as a blanket statement, that's probably pretty true. But yeah, I think that we have like a really narrow definition and understanding of intimacy. And as soon as we hear cuddling, we immediately think, oh, that's in a bed, that's with a partner, that's immediately going to lead to sex.
Mm-hmm.
And what's nice about this is none of that is part of the agenda. It's 100% platonic. Everyone's clothes stay on. There's no kissing. It's just a
There's
really
no
beautiful.
agenda. It's a process of healing.
That's it. It is
Yeah.
actually a really beautiful modality. And so I was trained in this through Cuddlist, the organization, last year. And it's really fulfilling on my end, right? Because I'm also receiving from this person. But really, the client is the focus. Everything is about them. So what I'm receiving is not necessarily I guess from like a serotonin standpoint, I'm receiving physical touch as a human being, right? That's part of cuddling. But other than that, it is all in service to and in support of the client.
Do you feel like you have to be in a certain headspace in order to do that because you're giving so much of yourself in that moment to the
Yeah.
other person?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's a great question.
I
And
feel like I would almost have to prepare for something like that, knowing that I was going to take on so many of their emotions.
well, two things about that. And I'll come back to taking on their emotions. That's a really good point you just brought up. But yes, being in the right headspace is super important. But that would be super important for any healing modality, right?
Right.
If I'm an acupuncturist or I'm doing Reiki, I have to be really like grounded and settled and centered in order to show up the way that I really want to be in integrity and all of that. And then in terms of like taking on someone else's emotions, that it's not exactly what happens, right? So again, you're there to hold space and hold the container for those emotions. But I think it gets into really tricky territory when you start to take on those emotions and start to identify with, I mean, I'm pretty empathic, right? So I'm going to feel what this person is feeling. I'm not going to sit here and tell you a tear has never dropped while someone is in, having a big emotional release. And I can feel like what they're feeling. But I have to be really clear that in order for them to have the experience that they need, I just need to be really centered and really grounded. Again, that's with any healing modality.
Mm.
Yeah.
I feel like within our relationship, being in our first lesbian relationship, we've taken a lot like a step back as far as like boundaries and consent. And me personally, growing up with a lot of childhood trauma, younger adulthood trauma, it's helped in our relationship having similar mindset, I think, of just what's comfortable, allowing me to receive love and affection in a way from a woman and feel safe enough to relax and breathe and say this is okay for me. I'm allowed to enjoy this.
Allowing yourself, yeah, giving yourself permission to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I see, like, yeah, that's cool. Very interesting.
What do you do in order to get yourself in that right mind space? Like, do you practice a certain, I mean, I know that you do, is it Reiki? Is that how you say it? Reiki?
Yeah. So Reiki is one of the modalities that I use, not necessarily on myself to get into that mindset. I think it's really just like centering, having a grounding practice beforehand. So literally putting 2 feet on the floor, closing my eyes, like really getting rooted and making sure that my nervous system is settled. I don't feel any tension in my body. And if I do feel anything, I want to kind of release that before the client comes in. Sometimes that might look like a meditation, like a mindfulness meditation. But yeah, I think it's just about centering. And the more that you do that, just like anything where you're building a muscle, I think it's easier to kind of drop into that centeredness. I mean, life is very lifey, right? So
Yes.
there's things that happen all the time. And I think,
Always lifing.
yeah, it's always lifing. And so this practice, these reps that you build of like, okay, life is swirling, this thing happened, this pulled me out here, this yanked me over here. But like, how quickly can I come back to center for myself and then for the benefit of someone else?
I feel like that's so important today. There's so much just swirl around us with a lot of tragic events happening in the world, and it's really easy to start to have your emotions pulled in so many directions that I think for me, I've just been experiencing a lot of um, not being able to focus on any one thing and feeling really on edge with everything, and I've never I've I'm not I can't say I'm not great at meditation because I don't give myself enough credit because I don't practice enough. But I think there's something to be said with practicing mindful meditation and having yourself be able to clear the energy in the room around you and find that center point. Um, like you said, strengthen that muscle, and the more you train it, the more you can turn it on and quickly clear it out. Where I think if you're not practicing that, it is harder to shut down the noise.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are different schools of thought here, right? Like some of the words that you're using, like clear it out or shut it down. Some people subscribe to that school of thought, and then other people are like, all of those things are parts of me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily need to shut them down or not make them welcome.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about integrating them, right? So
Right.
I think that the more that you can learn to like, okay, this is where I'm at right now. If I'm checking in on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like the highest on edge, if I'm
Mm-hmm.
at like an 8, how do I get down to a 4?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that doesn't mean that I push those things away because that 4 will come back up to an 8 like 30 minutes later. It's more like, all right, this is where I'm at right now. What do I actually need? Maybe doing a body scan, maybe doing just like a mental check
Mm-hmm.
in, maybe doing some breath work,
Mm-hmm.
seeing where you're at after 5 minutes of that, right? And sometimes it means welcoming those emotions or that on edgeness, the anxiety, the overwhelm, welcoming that to the table and actually giving it a seat and
Mm-hmm.
asking it, what do you have to tell me? Like, what message do you have for me?
Yep.
Right. So, two different schools of thought. And maybe there are people who subscribe to both. I don't know. But I definitely subscribe to the latter.
I think for me, I'm finally at a place where I'm able to sit face to face with certain things like that. Whereas before I relocated and I was always in fight or flight mode and just like ignored it all. And I was really good at just pretending like everything was fine. But I think a lot of that too is like the fear of sitting face to face with some of it, like those darker, older emotions that do come up. You don't really want to sit with them all the time. But for me, also, like, I know on the podcast of yours that we listened to, you talk a lot about like diving into childhood trauma and like actually really processing through what you've kind of pushed down for so long. So learning how to go from I am sitting with it, I'm face to face with it, to like past that point of like now I'm actually in the old shit for lack of a better term. Like let's really like I guess for me like trying to find that switch, you know, like how do you go from okay, here I am, I'm facing it to all right, now I'm done with that. Let's really get into like the root of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that looks different for everyone, right? Like
Right.
there's no one way to do it. There's no prescription. There's no destination. I think there are a lot of people who avoid anything that feels like suffering or feels painful because nobody wants to sit in that. And also in our society, there are numerous things that we can do to distract ourselves, right? And we're very, very good at distraction. And then societally, like the media, advertising, marketing has essentially made an entire industry that helps us distract ourselves from that. So when you sit down and you really take the time to intentionally encounter and engage with these emotions and look at like, okay, what's under the surface here? You are going against the grain of everything you've ever been taught and everything you're being currently fed. So that takes real courage and real bravery. And most of the people who do this work, even if they're at the beginning of it, they already have a sense that this is a lifelong commitment. This is not like a quick weekend cute retreat, right? Like it's forever. And there's really no certainty about what the outcome, quote unquote, is, right?
Right.
There's no like dangling carrot reward at the end. But again, I think what becomes clearer and clearer as you do the work is that it's actually not about the dangling carrot. It's not about this thing, this destination. It's back to what I said before. Life is going to life, and the reward is you get to come back to center within minutes instead of months.
Yeah, I need that.
Well, it's interesting just listening to you talk. I can tell that you've had a lot of practice at this. You obviously know what you're talking about and what you're doing. And I guess for me, it's like each different person has to have at least one moment, if not multiple moments, that make them realize that you have to do stuff like this to get to level up and to grow and evolve like we're constantly supposed to be doing. So I guess a question that I have for you is like, was there one specific moment in your life that made you realize like, this is what I'm going to teach myself about and then teach others about? Or was that like kind of a path that you kind of picked up along the way?
I'm smirking because I don't think for anyone it's one moment.
Right.
Right? Can we point to very pivotal moments across childhood, young adulthood, adulthood that were very impactful? Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really interesting question, right?
So many answers could happen right now.
So many answers, yeah. But yeah, I think the way that my best friend, you talked about, listening to the podcasts with Fadishta, the way that she would say it as a shadow work coach is people have to be in enough pain to want to make a change. And I see that with my clients as well, right? Like no one is like, I would love to go to trauma-informed leadership coaching. I would love to read this book, Heal to Lead, Revolutionizing Leadership Through Trauma Healing. No one's like, I'm so excited about this. I mean, maybe there's like 5 people in the world who are. But you have to be in enough pain and enough like, okay, I understand that what I've been doing is no longer working. Right? You have to have self-awareness first, even if it's just a little bit. To say like, I want to make a change. I don't know where to start, but guess what? Nobody knows where to start.
Mm-hmm.
So you pick up a book or you read a podcast or you listen to this and um, yeah, I don't know. But for me, I think that one of the more pivotal moments was I left home when I was 16. It was no longer safe for me to live in my home because of my mother, my biological mother. And when I was 24, I essentially said to her, "Hey, I would love to not love. If we're going to have any kind of relationship, we clearly need to do that with a third party, like a therapist, because we don't know, we can't, you know, we can't be in relationship."
Mm-hmm.
And at first she said yes, and then she backtracked. But the backtrack was like, it's not that I can't make it to that one session or that first session. It's like, I can't make it ever. And I had sort of issued this subconscious, maybe not subconscious, ultimatum that if we don't do this, then basically we're done.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the last time that I spoke with her. And that was 20 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So I would say because of the way that I grew up, there was so much need for affection and love, and so much, I needed so much evidence to prove that I was worthy of love and to prove that I mattered. And I needed that from a lot of external people. So I thought. And so I tried to find that over and over and over again. And I was creating my own suffering. Because when you outsource your self-worth, you create suffering.
Mm-hmm.
All of this healing work, whatever modality is plural, really you're all coming back to the understanding, like the deep knowing that you need to insource your own self-worth and self-love, not outsource it. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but there were many, many moments over the course of probably the first 25 years of my life that got me into enough pain and got me into enough trouble where and signaled to me that something was wrong because I didn't feel in integrity.
Mm.
Right? And to not feel in integrity when your stomach is churning, you know that feeling, you're like, damn, I'm like such a shitty person. Or I
Mm-hmm.
let this person down, or I hurt this person.
Mm-hmm.
I think when that happens enough, you're like, all right, something's got to change.
Mm-hmm.
There's a saying that I heard a long time ago that was like, even if it's scary, once the alternative becomes better than the reality, you know it's time to chase it. And that's always stuck with me, where it's like, okay, things can be scary, but if even with the fear, that still sounds better for me than what I'm currently in,
Yeah.
how do you ignore that?
Yeah. And the fear that you're talking about there is just uncertainty, right? Because what do? We chase familiarity,
Familiar, yeah.
right? Like we're just going to sit in our own hell, even if the alternative might be so much better, but it's just uncertain, right? Like we hate change, we hate uncertainty. We would literally go back to familiar and negative over anything else.
Yeah, I keep reminding myself it's important to learn to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You
Yeah.
know, the only way you can grow. And something else, just thinking while you're sharing your story about pain, like in order to have passion, you have to have pain. And so I think what I'm hearing is just coming out of all of that pain, healing from that pain, you developed like this great passion to go and be able to use it in a form to help others heal. And that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. For me, passion just recently was kind of combined with clarity, like real unshakable clarity of like, this
Mm-hmm.
is the direction that I want to go in my life. This is the work that I want to do. This is actually why I think I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
If you know, subscribe to that. That level of clarity makes a lot of yeses and a lot of nos very easy.
Yeah. So, how do you measure your success today, years later, of where you're at today?
Well, it's not financial.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be financial. It's what are the caliber of people that I surround myself with, and how much do I feel energized by them versus depleted by them?
Mm-hmm.
I really don't have anyone in my life that depletes me. And that
That's
is
amazing.
by design. And
Yeah.
it's taken me all 44 years to do that.
So what do your boundaries look like with that to
I
be able to
think
create that?
both of us are like, this is it. Because over the last 2 years, both of us have put up boundaries a lot with family, but friends as well. And with the recent coming out, you see people's true colors very quickly when you start to speak your truths. And we've had to like hold each other's hand through some serious
Because boundaries
relationships
can be
that
hard to when you're so used to being a people pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
Boundaries are really like they're easy to put on paper. They're really hard to follow through and have consistency.
Mm-hmm. But back to people pleasing, what that actually is outsourcing your your self-worth, and actually outsourcing the validation, right? So if your boundaries are so clear, like so unshakable, like these are what my values are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And anyone that is going to be in opposition of those values, meaning is going to dislike me, hate me, put me down, harm me because they don't subscribe to my values, or they don't
Mm-hmm.
respect who I am, like that's
Mm-hmm.
a clear no, right? And I get that it can be hard to enact those boundaries, but it's only because it's one of those muscles that you haven't been really doing the reps with, right? It's new.
Yep.
That's what I'm hearing, is it's new. So that makes all the sense in the world that they'd be a little shaky in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But and that mine were shaky, super shaky, especially as a young business owner. Like I started my business when I was 22 years old,
Mm.
right? It's like I would give a proposal and be like, okay, this website is $5,000 or something. And someone's like, $5,000. I can, I thought it was going to be like 2,000. I'd be like, oh, okay, 2,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was so shaky. Financial boundaries, contractual boundaries, relational boundaries, everything. But I think as you do the reps more and more, again, paired with the clarity of like who you are, what your values are, and
Mm-hmm.
what you're willing to accept and what you're not willing to accept, then the boundaries get stronger and stronger, meaning, your ability to hold them.
I find that relatable with I have a degree in graphic design, so I've worked in agency settings most of my life.
We have a
And
lot in common.
so in those settings too, you're always made to feel your ideas or your strengths, um, are only as good as your last project or whatever. And then you kind of have to like reprove yourself. And the constant for me while I was designing for big brands, it was that competitive, am I good enough, really beating yourself up. And then when it comes to pricing out a job or freelancing, and you put this value and you're like, I'm going to do this job for X amount of dollars, whether it took you 20 minutes or 20 hours, all of the time that it took you to get to that level. Or as an artist, when someone's like, that looks like a child painted it, I could do that. And it's like, but you didn't. And the artist that did it had to go through years and years. It's the same thing when I write music. It's like, I might have been able to write that song in under an hour, but that was like literally the last 15 years of my life that I just was able to, like, it happened and it was a beautiful thing. And so allowing yourself to be aware and give yourself credit to say, this dollar amount I'm worth that because of everything that got me to that
Yeah,
place.
it's compounding expertise.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, what was that, like refrigerator repairman analogy? Like your refrigerator is broken, the refrigerator repairman comes in, he pushes one button and he's like, oh, that'll be, $500. And you're like, you charge $500 a minute? And he's like, no, but every single job I've ever done for the last 20 years made me know exactly how to fix that and not spend 10 hours here.
Mm.
Right. And so what is the value to you as the
Mm-hmm.
person paying that bill? Like he was
Right.
in, out, and your food is not going to go to waste.
Yep.
Right. So yeah, I hear you. We're actually, my whole friend group is having this conversation as we speak about value and our work in the world. And Yeah. And I'm sorry that you had that experience in agency world. I spent the first 18 years of my life in agency world, and they're not all like that. But
Right.
I
Yeah.
will say that especially the larger agencies, they are designed that way,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, I'm in corporate. I'm not in the agency
Oh,
world. I'm kind of like an internal agency now, but I've been through a lot of different companies. Yeah.
yeah, that's a whole different podcast.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
so kind of to pivot it a little bit, I have what could turn into a very long discussion, but a question. I was raised very religious, and it was part of coming out for me was not pushing away, but stepping outside of the religion that I was raised so deeply in. And I saw that you were an ordained minister. And so I'm curious where your religious viewpoints intertwine with what you do now. Do you see yourself as religious at all? Have you been through an awakening there of any sort?
Interesting. So I actually got legally ordained earlier this year. And the reason why I did it was because when you do Reiki or you do work in the healing arts, um, there is, because I'm not like a licensed massage therapist, there's no sort of certification or licensure when you're working with people, you're laying hands on people essentially. So getting ordained is sort of a way to say, there is this legality to it where I am legally able to lay hands on people, whether that's in a healing session or whether they're transitioning out of life, right? So like a death doula or something like that. And for me, that felt really important just to have that. But from the religious aspect, I do not consider myself religious in any way, shape, or form. I grew up lightly Catholic, and I say lightly because we were that family that went to church on like Easter and Christmas, and that was it. And I did like CCD classes or something. But I remember sitting in church listening to something one time, and it was clearly very, homophobic, and I was like, oh, this is not for me. I didn't even know I was gay at that point, but I was like, no, I don't agree. I don't subscribe to any of this. So I would never consider myself religious. I consider myself a lifelong student of Buddhism. I actually just got back from India studying with the Dalai Lama for 2 weeks.
That's
amazing.
amazing.
Yeah, that
What?
was incredible.
Is there did I hear on I think maybe in one of your in the podcast we were listening to is that where you tried ayahuasca
Oh,
or
not
you
in India. No,
in
ayahuasca. Yeah, totally two separate things. Fedish and I went to Peru in October of 2022, so just coming up on 2 years
okay.
now.
Okay.
We did ayahuasca in Peru with the indigenous people there,
Mhm.
the indigenous healers, and that's whole different thing. I
Separate.
would
Okay.
consider that more like higher states of consciousness and spirituality.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing to do with India, but that was in Peru. Yeah, I just consider myself spiritual,
Yeah.
definitely not religious. And if I had to like sort of subscribe to any, I don't even want to call it an organized religion because it's really more of a lifestyle. It would be, I would say it as being a lifelong student of Buddhism.
Okay.
I like that.
I think a lot of people intertwine spirituality and religion so easily that it's always a question for me of how do I stay spiritual and still have certain beliefs but not have so much resentment towards the religious part of it, which is something I'm having a really hard time
Yeah.
like getting past. It's not that I miss it or have any resentment necessarily, but it's just this hump that takes a while to get over, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. For me, that would, I mean, I completely understand where you're coming from, where there's sort of that not cognitive dissonance, but like there's a tension between the two, right?
Mhm.
And I don't think that you coming out and saying, okay, this is who I am, I'm going to be really authentic and honest about that. There are parts of your religion that I would imagine that, you just said you really still subscribe to and believe in deeply. And then there are parts that don't align with your values anymore. I don't think you have to throw everything out. I mean, any kind of spiritual practice or religious practice is really deeply personal. It's
Right.
not, for me, that's like health decisions. That's a personal thing. Nobody else gets to say anything about that. So yeah, I hear the tension that's happening inside of you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are you currently working on? What is I know at one point I heard you say something that both of us, we were like, I love that. You said allowing certain doors to close or chapters to close is what I think you said, so that then new things can come your way. Where are you at right now with what's the next big thing you want for yourself, and what do you want to do? Where do you see yourself going?
I feel like, this is kind of an interesting time of year, right? It's fall in the East Coast, and the veils are kind of thin, and there's just like an interesting energy as we're kind of like going into winter. And I feel like there's some energy around clearing space, clearing a lot of space. This has been a very, very difficult year, with some things that have occurred in my life. And clearing the space feels really good. So what that looks like for me, I think for a long time, so I didn't change my pronouns until I was 41. My pronouns were she, they. Then I switched it to they, she, and now I go by they, them. And that
I feel like we
feels,
did the same thing, like same
yeah,
timeline
Sounds
at
just the
41
same.
too. Same
it's
timeline.
it's like a progression, or like I almost think about it like dipping your toe into the water just to like see, how does this feel? How does that create a ripple in, if I'm using the water analogy, how does that create a ripple? How do other people respond to that? How does it feel to like try it on, like
Yep.
a new jacket or something?
Yep.
And so that has been the progression, and they, them is pretty new as a new jacket. And it feels great. It feels clear. And then it's some other clarity that I got just maybe a couple months ago, was revisiting this idea that, when I was 26 years old, I had a breast reduction. I did not have large breasts, but I knew that how my body looked and how I felt in my body just didn't feel like me. So, 18 years ago, there was no such thing really as top surgery. And I think ever since that has even become an option, I've been like, oh, I'm sorry I missed the boat on that. Like I only got a breast reduction back 18 years ago. I guess I'm just going to kind of accept this and just like live the rest of my life, in this body, even though it doesn't feel like me. And then this year I had the clarity of, why are you subscribing to that story? And so I am actually having top surgery in December.
Oh my
That
goodness,
makes me,
congratulations.
yeah, that makes me happy for you so much, because we talk about it a lot on the podcast, going back and forth. I've questioned whether or not to get top surgery, but even going back to you just saying like you felt like you missed the boat, or you're calling to like
the opportunity.
the opportunity. I say that a lot with my coming out journey, being married to men, having children, knowing, always identifying as bisexual, but knowing that I never allowed myself the opportunity to actually know what it was like to date a woman. I had like encounters with women, but always in relationships with men. And I was just like, well, that's something you figure out when you're younger. Like that's just the way I thought it was. You figure that out when you're younger and you go that path. I didn't go that path. I missed my opportunity. And then it gets to a point where you have that clarity and you're just like, no, like I'm not going to settle for that story anymore. It does not fit me anymore. And the same thing with pronouns of adjusting them. A lot of that was people pleasing and making sure I was so used to people pleasing. I didn't want anybody to get it wrong. You know, I wanted everybody to feel this inclusive of like, if you want to say they, them, cool, she, her, still okay. And then, flipping them around and leaning more on the they. And then it was just like, I'm doing this still for you guys. This is fucking bullshit. I'm still doing it for you guys. We're done with that. We're done with
You
that.
know what I did it for? In retrospect, I didn't know this at the time, but I did it because every time either my partner and I or my friend group would go out to a restaurant, the server always comes over and it's like, hi, ladies.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to feel that pit in my stomach that
Mm-hmm.
was like, can we just say friends
Yeah.
or
You
guys
two
or
sound
people?
so much alike.
I know. I'm like, my
Listening
whole
to
spirit
you talk
animal
is
here.
like listening to Kirby.
So that was actually subconsciously, I think I didn't want to feel othered all the time because it's exhausting to like have to quote unquote correct people.
It
And
is.
they
It
don't
really is.
know, right? But like, and you sometimes do not get a great reaction with that. Sometimes you get an eye roll. Sometimes you get a like I pretend I don't hear you,
Mm-hmm.
or no, I'm not going to say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't happened a lot, but it's happened at least a handful of times where it was like, oh, okay. And I also just don't want to be the person who like makes everything all about them every time
Mm-hmm.
we're all together.
Yep.
So the she was like, oh, well, if the server says ladies, then even though I definitely don't feel like a lady is a thing that I like subscribe to or like feel like, um, it made it okay in a way. And then also my friends didn't have to correct that person either.
Mm-hmm.
And I think where I'm at now is like, again, back to the centeredness. This is like the through line of our conversation. Now it's like, the jacket fits really well and like they, them feels great. Um, and I actually find that if the server comes over, because it happened last night, if the server comes over and says ladies, I actually don't have a reaction because I'm like, you don't know. And like from the appearance, like I look a little bit more feminine. That's fine. That's just what I look like. I can't really change that. I don't really want to change that.
We just had this whole conversation on our podcast episode from this past Monday all around this because the question was, with Kirby identifying they, them, naturally people think I want to transition to a man because I say I'm a masculine, lesbian,
The short hair,
non-binary,
the
short
way
hair, all of
they
that.
dress.
I'm very comfortable where I am today, but I was trying to explain in our conversation that it's so past that. Like, it's not this binary, like you have to pick one or the other. It's so
Yeah.
far past that, and being so in love with my fluidity and just where I'm at in my own personal journey. That's not an end game for me.
Mhm.
But because as late in life lesbians, because that label is something that we hold on to and claim, we are okay. I don't like girl. I really don't care for lady. I hate ma'am. I have a list of things that I'm like, ick, don't say those to me. And words that just feel more, even if they seem like the younger generation of just being like bro or whatever, feels more comfortable to me. Or even an old man calling me bud. I love it, right? I call me buddy, bud all day. But when we're sitting at a table at a restaurant, I would much rather somebody who doesn't know me refer to us as ladies, because then, especially for where Ember is and her journey coming out as a lesbian and really wanting to be sure, or not sure, but have self-awareness and people around us aware that we are in a relationship together. Um, and she's not straight. And that feels right for us when we're out and it's a stranger and they refer to us as like, here ladies, let's go be seated at your table or whatever.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So are you saying like you are conscious of her experience in that and therefore that feels good for you? Is that what
Yep. Yeah, because we had to talk through a lot of things. There was a time after I because as we were starting to date, I was still she they. And so as I identified they them, it turned into, well, what are you comfortable with, girlfriend? And then it was like, no, I'm not. But
Yeah.
like partner didn't feel right for us because we were still referring to, as we were ending our relationships with our husbands at the time, we were referring to them. They were supportive in our coming out journey. And so they were part of it, of being partners with us. And it all kind of meshed together. And it was just like, when you're coming out new in this spotlight, there's all of these terms and phrases and labels, and you feel like in order to get somebody to know who you are without giving this long speech, you just have to throw these names out. So it's like,
Yeah.
I'm Kirby, I'm a non-binary lesbian who's okay with my womanhood because I still feel very close to being able to um conceive and birth children, and having that experience with my body and how incredible it was during the time of my pregnancies. And um, you said something about death doula, and I am a certified doula, to where I really have a lot of um, empowerment towards women in their bodies and helping them get to that level of bravery and confidence to trust that their body is like this amazing, powerful thing that we've been taught all of our life that's like not good enough, right? And so going off the death doula, I know I'm going all over the place with my thoughts, but just like thinking through, I'm like, there was a time when I helped my father transition out of life, and that moment I was like, I think like I like it, the similarities of bringing someone into the world and helping someone exit the world, it is so just, holy shit, is it the same? And it was such a powerful learning experience to me that I'm so thankful that I had it. And I think that sitting with that and allowing myself to just see how much deeper life can be, not just these like, well, I'm in this box today or I'm this. And it's just like, there's no end game of me because I'm they, them, that I'm going to medically transition to a man. That's not it for me. Love it for the people that it is. I support that. I love the trans community, but it's not for me. Like, my journey is deeper than that. And I'm not discrediting other people's journeys, but for me personally, it goes beyond having that end game of, I earned my manhood.
Yeah. 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 There's like actually something that you gave me. So I thank you in what you just said, especially around the similarity between bringing life into the world and helping, transition of life out of the world. I have never given birth. I've dated men, but I was never married. I never had children, never married to a man. Let me clarify. I was married to a woman, but never birthed children. And I have actually helped a couple of people exit life, transition out of life. And it felt so natural,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I do think that, not to say that men can't do that work, I'm not saying that,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think that because I was assigned female at birth, because there is some part of me that very much still feels that womanhood that you're talking about, I do think that that's why it felt so natural,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was like without question. Now, if you had asked me this 5, 6, 7 years ago, right? Like, oh, do you ever see yourself doing any work kind of in that realm? I literally either would have run screaming out of the room or laughed in your face. Like, you got the wrong person. And as I've like gotten clearer on my values and just like clearer as to like who I am and what I do bring to the world, my value, all of that, it's like I'm naturally leaning. I don't know if I'm being pulled or leaning, maybe a little bit of both, into these like healing realms, these spiritual realms, these higher consciousness realms. And part of that is, yeah, not being afraid of death.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you mentioned ayahuasca a little bit earlier. In the ayahuasca journey, I literally experienced my own death. And because that was not scary to me, it was actually just very, I won't say matter of fact, but it was not like something to be afraid of, right? It was like the way that I died in that journey was the way that would have been the most that was the thing that I was the most afraid of. And it wasn't the way I died, it was the state that I was in, which was feeling like I actually didn't matter. No
Mhm.
one cared. I was completely unloved, completely alone, in the dark, cold, like all the worst things for
But
me.
does that goes back to your does that some of
Correct.
that goes back to your childhood because that's
Totally.
how I would relate to it
Totally.
similarly. Yeah.
Totally. So it was like, okay, that medicine gave me exactly what I needed. Like, oh, you're scared of this? Let us have you experience this to let you see how it's actually not that scary, right?
Mhm.
It wasn't scary at all. And I was conscious the whole time, like
Mhm.
conscious in my body as me, and also conscious as the form that I took in the journey,
Mhm.
right?
Wow.
So I know that's a little hard to understand, but it wasn't scary. And so coming out of that journey, I was like, oh, well, now that I'm not afraid to die, I'm also not afraid of death.
Mhm.
And I was so compelled by it. I was like, now why am I all of a sudden interested in helping people and really holding the emotion and whatever else can come up, like as they're in their final weeks or months of life?
I
And
think oh,
yeah,
sorry. I didn't
no,
mean
I
to
was just
interrupt.
gonna say, I would have never in a million years thought that that would be something I would be interested in.
Mhm. Yeah, I think after helping my dad transition, um, there was I don't wanna call it obsession, but I was very intrigued in death, and it just seemed like such an amazing thing. It wasn't scary, you
Mhm.
know? The thought of it was scary, the, um the context of it was scary, but the action of it was not scary, and so I wanted so badly to go with him on that journey. I was just like in it. And I think for me, after that happened, there was disappointment. And so this is life. So now I have to wait. I have to wait my turn. And I think I was not even prepared to enter my own journey of coming out at that time because I was working through those feelings. But um being able to allow myself uh to see through a lot of that and come through, then the scary part was like, okay, now I'm gonna just flip everybody's world upside down around me and say, surprise, I'm gay.
Yeah, and a little bit, there is a piece of you that I'm sure a piece of you died in that, a piece of you died off maybe.
Mhm. Mhm.
And there was also probably some grief around, some aspect of the coming out,
Mhm.
right? For like,
Oh yeah, it I feel like it happened naturally with my dad was very religious, and there are things that as trying to never disappoint your parents and please them and all of the things, I just held on to that and was like, this is who everybody thinks I am, and this is who I'll keep being. And then once that died in me, all of that, I was able to say, okay, now I can put that aside and see where it leads me. And but yeah, I mean, childhood trauma and working through that and going through the pain and getting through all of it, and then having that clarity, like you said before, you have to show up and do the work, and you have to pick your heart, and you have to um keep doing it because it's years. It takes a long time. And for me, when people say like, "Oh my gosh, why did it take you into you were into your 40s?" And it's just like, for whatever reason, there were other lessons I needed to learn before I could get to this like really great space in my life. And it's not always great. There's still things. I still go to therapy every few weeks. Like, I'm still working through a lot of things. I'm still talking about um past trauma, or allowing myself. I don't feel I love my family. I love my mom dearly, but I didn't have affection and love and all of the things. And so today, as an adult, I, for whatever reason, when I'm around her, I feel very on edge, very guarded, very not safe. And it's not in a bad, like, oh, she's not a safe person. It's just, I feel so like this energy doesn't fit me, and I don't understand why, because I love her so much, and she accepts me, and she loves me for who I am, and she's trying so hard with the pronouns and all of the things, and it's amazing. But at the end of the day, I'm like, I I close off. I close off around other people. And I think those are things that I'm working through of like, why do I feel this way?
Yeah. And I think both can be true all the time, right? You can love someone and feel unsafe around them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I've gotten to the point where even though I haven't spoken to my mother in 20 years, I love her.
Mm-hmm.
I actually love her. In the book, because of the ayahuasca journey, I was able to get to the point where I wrote her a love letter, like a expression of like, I not like you did the best you can or
Mm-hmm.
did the best you could, but I love you for who you are, who you like for giving me life,
Mm-hmm.
for being she was actually pretty good to my brother. Like I loved her for being a decent mom to my brother when
Mm-hmm.
we were younger. Um and I don't think I've ever written the words "I love you, mom," and I was able to do that.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty impactful. So it's like I would never feel safe around this person. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't for 44 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, well, I didn't for 24 years. And then for the last 20, my life has been actually pretty great because I didn't have that really toxic, and I don't use the word toxic lightly. My life would be very different if I kept her in it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Um, And yeah, I think that there can be this both and, right? I love her, I forgive her, and I feel completely unsafe around her.
Mm-hmm.
It can all
And
be
I think that goes back to what you said in the beginning of who are you and what do you do? You're learning that you love. You want to love, even
Mm-hmm.
if it's someone that maybe didn't love you the best, or, I feel that a lot with my, like what I was talking about with the cutting people out and forgiving people. That's been a hard part for me. People that I held on to a lot of the baggage from, and finally getting to a place where it's like, okay, I can let this go. I can let
yeah.
this whole person go in a peaceful way
Hmm.
and not let it bring me down anymore.
Yeah. And obviously, forgiveness is for you. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you need to engage with someone again. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's really about you opening up that space so that you're not just full of repressed emotion. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Something I
huge.
struggle with.
I feel like I know we're almost at an hour. I feel like we could talk to you forever, and there's still so many questions. I'm like, what did you do when you went to Meta and NASA and all, you're consulting and you're doing all of these things, and
That's not the most interesting
I
stuff.
know it. I know it's not, but like when your ego, you see that and you're like, oh wow, like that's pretty amazing, and you're doing all these great things, and I just really respect it and look up to you as somebody who I would lean into and try to
Goals.
goals. Yes, big goals of just being able to have the space and enter a chapter where you're leading and you're filling your cup and you're saying, I'm doing this because this is what feels right.
And you're doing all of it as your most authentic self, which to me, it took a long time for me to be able to say, that's okay to be me. Like, whether anybody else agrees with who I am,
Yeah.
I'm still me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that comes back to this like unshakable knowing of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then those values and that yeah, it's interesting that it has taken this long, quote unquote. I mean, I feel like we're all very young. I'm 44, this long. I don't know what that means, but I do know that the second half of my life is going to look very different than the first half, and I'm very excited about it.
I'm excited for you.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what else you do.
So, as we wrap this up, how can our listeners find you? I mean, we'll link everything when we post, but just in general, people that are listening, if they want to know more about you, how can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, everything that I do is pretty much on my website, which is just klcampbell.com. So everything from like the book, retreats that I run, coaching, speaking, the trauma healing work, the one-on-one work. So everything that I do, which is also kind of new that I packaged it all on one site. Because at first I was like, this is very confusing for people. They're like coaching, and then we're doing Reiki, and I just came to a place where I was like, this is me. Back to exactly what you just said. I was like, this is me. It's may not make sense to everyone, but at the end of the day, the through line is like, I get to love people really, really well. And there are a lot of people who need connection and need healing. And I'm not above anyone. There's no hierarchy here. I'm not actually doing much. I'm just able to hold people really well. I'm a double Scorpio, Capricorn moon. So like my whole world is deep, deep work.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us and talk all just on a deeper level. I love it when we have a guest that we can just like dive into such a deep topic and be vulnerable and share thoughts and stories and emotions. And it's what we like to do best. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day, because I'm sure you have great things to get to as well. So
I have a Reiki
appreciate it.
session after this, so yes, I appreciate this conversation so much. I actually got a ton out of it, so I really thank you both.
Good.
And yeah, I agree. Like having these kinds of conversations where we can just like dive into the deep end right off the bat. That's what I live for. So I appreciate you both.
And connection. I think growing from every new encounter you have is always good, always healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Kelly. Well,
Thank you.
stay in touch.
Sounds good.
Thanks.